Okay, hello everybody. As I usually say when I jump on the air, although, hold on, I need to put my headphones on. Anyway, as I usually say when I'm on the air, good afternoon, good evening, good day, good morning to you, whatever part of the alleged globe you are on. I hope you are having a good one. I hope that things are going as well as they can for you, and if they're not, I hope that you are dealing as best as you can. I mean, look, nobody ever said life was going to be easy. I don't recall anybody ever saying that to me. Matter of fact, I recall most of my life from a very early age, most people saying the same thing, that nobody ever said life was going to be easy, and supposedly it's not supposed to be easy, and that supposedly would be boring if life was easy. I don't know. I wouldn't know if it was boring or not. I've certainly had some long stretches or some stretches of easy times in life, as you probably all have experienced at some point or another. Is it boring? Do you think, who wants easy? So Divine asks, who wants easy? I could go a few different places, a few different directions with that. But I don't know. The grown man inside me now says no, easy is not always the preferred method. Anyway, thanks for joining us, y'all. If you've been listening, you know that you've been listening to the Spotlight and the Artist and Bring Your Own Tune with my lovely peoples, One Media, Divine. I don't see Claxton in here, but I see Jeff and I see Hope. What's going on? El Brujo, what's up? Crimson, of course, Bush Radio, what's up, dude? And Yama, and I see some names I'm not familiar with, and there's a newcomer here, which we will be saying hello to very shortly after I give my whole intro spiel and housekeeping and stuff. So, speaking of housekeeping, I should probably give a little extra warning today, and the whole the disclaimer and all that. Let's say this. You know, first of all, you're listening to Hangin with Who each and every Friday. Currently, its start time is 5 p.m. Eastern time, and that is 10 UTC. And I'm getting so sick of translating these times with the whole daylight savings thing, but I think we're coming up to the end of it soon. I think UTC changes sometime in December, and we'll be somewhat back to normal, whatever the hell that is. I say normal with air quotes, like all the time now. I've been doing that for years. I'm sure many of you probably can relate. The hell is normal? So, Hangin with Who is live each and every Friday here on MSP Waves, and it is a special kind of show. Definitely not for the faint of heart most of the time. We cover a lot of controversial, radical topics. We go places that a lot of well, I shouldn't say a lot of radio, because we're here on decentralized media and we're kind of very underground. So in that respect, probably a lot of radio shows do go into such topics. But overall, I think most of the time, you know, people steer clear of very controversial and triggering topics, so to speak. Understandably so. I mean, you know, one thing I've kind of come to terms with in recent years, like I've always, for a long time, I've kind of been a cage rattler. You know, I've always been someone that you know, I've been woke, if you will, and I'm gonna say that in air quotes as well for quite some time. And it's not easy navigating society when you know certain things and you've been exposed to certain things and you've had certain experiences in life that kind of shape and mold you, that are not necessarily the norm. Sort of like extreme highs and extreme lows, which I don't think that everyone necessarily experiences. And I think I can say that confidently because I've been around. I talk to people all the time, especially having been, you know, an entertainer and podcasting for a long time. Like I talk to people, you know, it's one of the things I do. I mean, here I am talking, right? And people talk to me, and I can say that, you know, I don't think that it's a majority, and I don't even think that it's half of the people you run into in your life who've had such extreme experiences in life, good, bad, or indifferent. Not saying one way or the other, because good experiences can change you in good ways and bad ways, and bad experiences can do the same thing. And, as you all know, one of the things that I've dealt with in my life is PTSD for about 13 years now. And I was having a little conversation with my guest who's going to be on the air with us shortly. He's actually a good friend of mine. We've known each other for quite some time. We graduated at community college together, and we participated in leadership program in our college together. It's kind of how we got to know each other. And even through those experiences, I think that he and I and the other people who we were in cahoots with at the time were had experiences that many people do not. And so one of the things I've come to find is that experiences, if you really kind of stop for a moment to reflect, to process, to kind of accept them for what they are, to live in the moment, it does change you in many ways. And as I said, it's not cookie cutter. It doesn't mean that every time you have a great experience that you've become a better person. It doesn't mean that every time you've had a bad experience you become a bad person or whatever. I think it can go either way. So, so I think it's back to the whole thing about controversial, radical topics and sort of rattling cages and things. I have come sort of to the realization in recent times that it's not something that is always going to be well received, and it isn't something people don't necessarily walk around looking for truth, right? People don't necessarily walk around looking to become woke, right? It's something that either happens or it doesn't. And that having been said, it's one of the reasons why I've started to take my shows in a different direction, as some of my longtime followers have probably taken note. In the beginning, I would have a guest, and we would might talk about, and I'll still do, hit topics like anti-vaccines or 9/11 or things that are along that scope, but I've taken it more in a direction of sort of a psychological approach and really touch more on emotions and spirituality and mental health and all the things that go along with this journey in life. So anyway, that's having been said is I do want to give a little bit of a warning today, okay? We are going to talk about a couple of quite controversial things, not anything really out of the ordinary or anything all that radical or crazy, not something new, things that have been with us in society for a very, very, very long time, actually. Things that everyone in some way, shape, or form has been exposed to in one way or another throughout your life, whether it's your own personal experiences or people close to you, or even just being exposed through media, through just kind of living in the world. And so, all right. So before I even get into that, real quick, let me sort of pause for a moment and do a little bit more housekeeping. So let's make a mental note, and we'll come back to this in a moment. All right. So first of all, once again, let me remind you, you're listening to Hangin with Who here on MSPWaves.com each and every Friday, currently at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. And I'm also here on Mondays, currently at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, and that is the flu shot. Mondays, it's a little bit more of an open format, a little bit more Steam It related. Yes, I'm wiping my nose on air if you're watching, and I may even wind up chewing on some chips because I'm a little hungry. So forgive me or not. And also, since you've been listening to Spotlight on the Artist and Bring Your Own Tune, I have to shout out SMA, Steam It Music Association. And while I'm talking, I should remember to grab all these links before the show. Let me get you an invite for SMA if you're not in there already, although the names that I see here, I think most of you are familiar. Steam It Music Association is your one-stop shop on Steam It and Discord for all things music, literally all things music. And you will hear me over there every Tuesday and Wednesday, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, Tuesdays, I bring you Viscosity D&B, all things jungle, drum and bass, dubstep, trap. And on Wednesdays, it's the Roadblock. I alternate each week between the genres of either hip-hop, trip-hop, downtempo, or house and techno and EDM, if you will. And kind of appropriate to today's topic, if you check my posts and look at the recordings of this week's shows, I promised to do all old school this week to a handful of people. So Tuesday night, I did an old school pre-jungle hardcore breakbeats set. 90 started around late 91, ended around middle of 94 with some very, very early jungle hits. 3 hours of nonstop music, so check that out if you want to. And then on Wednesday, I promised to do an old school house set. So I did a house set starting around 88, 89, and ended probably somewhere around late 92. Again, 3 hours of nonstop. Yes, as One Media says, he's also one of our fellows over there in Steamit Music Association. And he also has a show, if you want to type the correct day and time, because I can't keep it all committed to memory here while I'm doing my thing. So if you want to go ahead and One Media and Divine, if you guys ever want to, feel free to drop your links into posts during the show, please do so. Anyway, so a little bit appropriate, because if you are a house head, if you've been exposed to sort of the, I'm going to say the New York club scene, because it's where I grew up, but I happen to know that there are a lot of major cities around the world that sort of mirrored what New York was doing. And of course, house music technically started in Chicago, heavily influenced by the techno sounds of Detroit, also heavily influenced by the sounds of Germany and, of course, England throughout the years. And so one of the things about house music is what goes along with the history of house music, which really has its roots in disco, is it's actually a very gay music. Yes. I mean, if you grew up in New York City in the late 80s, early 90s, and you went out to a club on a Friday, Saturday night where they were playing house music, chances are you either went to what was predominantly a gay club, or, you know, even if it was unintended, it just happened to just turned out that way. Or you were at the least very, very exposed to a tremendous, a great gay population. And along with that came many aspects of, I guess, what you might call gay culture, or at this stage of the game, what we refer to as LGBT. And I believe there might be a couple extra letters in there. I'm a little bit, I get stuck in my ways and I just say LGBT at this point, but I know that there's the Q and there's some other things in there. I just can't keep up. I'm sorry. Too many letters. And so, like me, having grown up in the New York scene and started DJing in the late 80s and started going to clubs in New York City actually in 1989, before I was old enough, back then they didn't card anybody. I know I've talked about this before. Along with that came the transgender population, drag queens and cross-dressers, and it seems a little, even someone like me who isn't like, I mean, I'm a heterosexual man. I'll say that. I think I can say that proudly and confidently. But having grown up alongside so many people in the LGBT community, I don't know that it's proper to sort of lump them all into one category. I mean, I think that there's different levels to people's sexual identity, gender identity, sexuality. I think that there also may be a lot of misconceptions, particularly amongst the heterosexual community. People, it's interesting because homosexuality has actually been in with us for a very, very long time. If you look at history, if you look at ancient history, it's not really anything all that new. I think that what may be new to most of the world is sort of celebrating your sexual identity, your sexual orientation, as sort of a lifestyle, a culture, or a choice. And I think that a lot of people would argue that it's not necessarily a choice. I'm not sure. I would have to say it's probably not. And then in more recent years, as we've become more aware of these sort of things in our society, in our world, and as people have, or at least some people have become more accepting and tolerant, and I hate that word tolerant. I think accepting is definitely a much more positive term and way of looking at it. I think that we've also become exposed to a lot of things that sort of go along with the LGBT community. In particular, we became aware in the late 70s, early 80s of this, something that was very, very new to the world, HIV/AIDS. And I also think that it's a little bit of a misconception to say, I mean, at one time they would have said, people would have said that only gay people get HIV/AIDS, and that's absolutely untrue. At one time they would have said it was a black disease. That's absolutely untrue. Now, if we want to get into the whole conspiracy thing, we could talk about how maybe it was a biological warfare and maybe aimed at the gay and black community. Maybe. I'm saying maybe. Don't freak out. This is Hanging with Who after all. Get used to it. Nonetheless, I think that, it's always been a little bit of an interesting topic for me because of my exposure to the community. And I think that in all musical genres, in entertainment in general, I mean, if you look at Hollywood, if you look at the history of television, and I mean, if we look at rock and roll and we look at people like Freddie Mercury, for instance, gay people have been entertaining the living shit out of us for a very, very long time. And that having been said, I think that the gentleman who I am going to bring on the air is quite an entertaining fellow, actually. If you looked at the pre-show post, matter of fact, oh, crikey, I've got to copy and paste it again. Austin, hang with me. I know you probably can hear me. I've just dragged you into the live room, but give me a moment to grab the pre-show post for everyone so they can get a load of your wonderful headshot. Insert gay joke here. Ha! Yeah, and yes, and that's another thing that I meant to kind of give the warning and the disclaimer about is jokes today are absolutely appropriate. Just go easy on us. Or don't. I really don't care. So there's a pre-show post. You get a load of my friend, and if there's any gay men in the audience, I think he's available. I don't know. Are you, Austin? Are you with us today? Hello. All right. Let me see. Austin, I have dragged you into the live on-air room, and you should be able to engage your push-to-talk as we did earlier and engage the audience. Okay. Give me a moment, ladies and gentlemen. We did do a sound check, and I'm sure that he's coming through. Yeah, I see. Is he server muted? Is it my fault? No. Not me. Not on my end. He should have his. We did do a test. We did make sure. Let me. Bear with me, folks. Let me message him and make sure that he's with us. And anyway, as we figure out what's going on with Austin, I'll tell you real quick. Next week, I have a very interesting guest lined up. Let me look at the calendar there. Yes. Finally, going to get on the air, Officer Dominic Izzo. So if you want to look him up. All right, so he's typing to me. All right, one moment. I'm going to see if I can type one-handed. You know what? Sometimes it helps if we do this and we do this. All right, Austin, give it a shot. Oh. I actually know what might be the problem here. All right, Austin, how about now? Do you hear me? I accidentally had. Yeah, well, because he has this push to talk on, so wouldn't that. No, I don't think I want to reboot Discord while I'm on the air. I've never had to do that before. It's usually on the guests, and this is his first time using Discord, although we did do a test a little bit before we went on air. All right, Austin, if you. No, it's not on your end, and not on my end. I know. All right, ladies and gentlemen, give me a moment so I can type two-handed. That way things will happen a little bit faster. All right, so I'm typing to Austin, letting him know that sometimes it helps if he actually disengages from Discord and then comes back in. That does tend to fix the problem most of the time. Uh, and
Hey,
aha, oh, that's
JP.
yes, Rondon. How are you?
So I'm gonna take him into the waiting room and get it all figured out,
All right,
and you can
cool.
just talk to the audience.
All right, I will do
So
that.
I'll handle this in the background. All right,
Thank you so much.
and I'll also be messaging you directly, Rainbow. So look for my little icon.
All right, cool. He is aware. He's with us. All right, cool. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to chew your ear off a little bit more about some. I don't know. I don't know how much more I can talk about gay things, considering I'm not exactly a gay man. But as I said, I grew up very exposed to the LGBT community, and actually started before I got involved in the club scene and DJing in New York. And so I'll tell you real quick. My mother was a fairly famous off-Broadway actress. She she was in a lot of Spanish plays by oh god, now his name is going to escape me, the gentleman who wrote the plays, but he is Mario Pena, who is actually Elizabeth Pena's father. Elizabeth Pena is a big Hollywood actress. She's been in tons and tons of movies. If you look her up on IMDb, you've probably seen just about every movie she's ever been in. She also had a short stint on television for a while on a sitcom called I Married Dora in the late 80s, and actually she was my babysitter when I was a little kid. And so my mom would take me very often to the theater when they were doing rehearsals and all kinds of things, and she would take me to parties afterwards and rap parties and all these things. And as I said, I mean, if you know much about the entertainment industry in general, it's inundated with gay and lesbian people. It has been for a very, very long time. I'm not exactly sure why that is, although I mean, a lot of my favorite actors either outwardly gay or at least have been outed in some way, shape, or form. The only one that really shocked me at one point, not because I care, but I just never would have guessed he was gay, was Kevin Spacey. And of course, now that I know, it's kind of weird. Like, now that I know, I can see it, if you will. But he's the only one. Well, Liberace, I mean, I think he's been one media mentioned, if you're not looking at the chat, Liberace, but I think he was outwardly gay from day one. I don't know that he ever tried to hide it. But Kevin Spacey apparently did a very good job of hiding it for a very, very long time, and was outed. I believe the story goes that someone actually just happened to see him kissing a man, and that was it for that. And yeah, Jack Dub mentioned something. Jack, I don't keep up so much with all that Hollywood bullshit, and I don't mean bullshit that it didn't happen, or I mean just bullshit that I don't need in my head. Like, I do love to be entertained, and I'm not gonna lie. There are a lot of Hollywood movies I love, and I collect DVDs when they're my favorite movies. But I usually refer to it as the Hollywood, um, and it's a very love-hate relationship. You know, there are a lot of things about it on the conspiracy end of things, and on the satanic side of things that I understand about the Hollywood, and I know that the entertainment business in general, I mean, the music business might actually be worse than Hollywood. It's hard to say, but nonetheless, yes.
Hey,
There we go, ladies and gentlemen.
oh, there we go. Look, invite a gay guy who doesn't understand technology onto a show, and look what happens. Oh my god.
It all goes wrong. It's all.
I know, right? Jesus.
Ladies and
Ask me
gentlemen.
to coordinate your wardrobe, and I'm good to go. But use Discord. I don't know. It's beyond me.
Oh, my very gay friend Austin is so good of you to join us. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you so much for having me.
No
and
problem.
for putting up with my.
Putting up with you? Oh, geez, how are you?
Putting up with me, putting up with my technical, illiteracy or whatever.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. I've always heard gay people aren't good with technology.
We're good with Grindr. That's about it.
Stop.
We know how to use that.
Stop. It's too early in the show for all that.
Okay. Oh my god, you can respond with an eggplant emoji? I love it. Oh my god, this is great.
Oh, yeah. Oh, there's all kinds. I'm sure there's tons of gay emojis, too. Did you like the rainbow I
good.
put there on your on the post for you?
Oh, yes, of course.
So,
we always need it.
Since we're on the subject, real quick, let me tell you a quick story about the rainbow thing. The first time I discovered that gay people had appropriated the fucking rainbow. Fuck you for that. So I was 17 or 18 at one of my first raves. I was going to raves weekly at the time, and a pretty girl handed me a necklace. It was a metal necklace, and it had these metal rainbow rings. And I loved it. It was awesome. I wore this necklace for like months and months. With every outfit, it was rainbow, so it didn't matter. It matched everything. And so I'm in a circle of friends one day. We're hanging out, smoking blunts or whatever. And one of my friends puts his arms around me. He's like, dude, man, he grabbed the necklace. He's like, that's cool, man. I'm like, oh, yeah, thanks. This girl gave it to me. He's like, no, it's cool, though, that you're very brave. And he's like, patting me on the shoulder. And like another friend's like, yeah, man, we didn't know. Like, that's I'm like... And I'm like, okay, well, I'm not dating this girl or anything. She's just a friend. They're like, no, of course not. And so, like, this went on for a few minutes, and I'm finally like, what the hell are you guys talking about? They're like, dude, like, we didn't realize you were gay. You came out of the closet. It's cool. We're still your friend. And I'm like, I don't know. And I still, like, I'm clueless, like, why this necklace had tipped them off to me being gay. And, of course, somebody explained it. And I can no longer look at the rainbow the same way again.
Oh my god, that's too funny.
So why? What do you even know? Like, where did that come from?
So that's a really great question, and I know some of the story, but not necessarily all of it. So the rainbow flag was made by a man by the name of Gilbert Baker in, I want to say, the early 70s, I believe, after the Stonewall riots in 69. And he did it because he wanted to make a flag. I love that trippy rainbow gif I'm seeing. But he wanted to make a flag for the community. He said, a lot of other communities, cultural communities, etc., have flags. Why don't gay people have a flag? And I believe the reason that he decided to choose the rainbow was because by using a bunch of different colors, he wanted to represent the, variety of people and identities that made up the gay community at that time. What is also interesting is that first off, the rainbow flag now only has 6. It originally started with 8, and I think only the original flag has 8. There was a color shortage of one of the dyes that they used.
Really?
So then it went to 7. Yes. So it went from 8 to 7. I forget what color they got. I want to say it was the indigo color.
Okay.
And then pink was also on the flag as well. It was originally pink, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and purple. And then it had 7 colors. And then they decided to get rid of pink because when there were only 7 colors on the flag, if they hung it from a lamppost, the middle color would often be blocked by the actual lamppost on one side.
I see.
So
Well,
now they have it as only 6 colors.
Well, breast cancer's got pink, so that's out.
Yes, absolutely, exactly. They said the homos can't have that. We need no.
Oh, come on, that's inappropriate.
Okay, sorry.
That's all right.
Forgive me. I'm a
No.
homophobe, so.
Oh, stop it. So so listen, real quick. There's a lot more to this. We're not just here to talk about your flamboyant homosexuality. This is something that's not only your life, but something that you do. Well, ever since I've known you, it's something you've been very passionate about, sort of getting involved with the LGBT community in many facets. And I see that that's something that since we've graduated college, you've done a very good job of. And so the pre-show post kind of gives a little bio and an idea of what your work is in the community. But I really want to delve into that. It's always jokes and fun and games, but let's get serious for a minute, and because this is kind of a serious topic, considering that we're coming up on, what'd you say, World AIDS Day, and December is loosely considered AIDS Awareness Month, and this is definitely no joking matter.
Absolutely, yeah. So I guess a little bit of kind of context of why I got so involved in the community. I had a really great. So oftentimes when people come out and they end up getting really involved in working for LGBTQ communities, individuals, etc., a lot of times it's because they had some really negative experiences growing up that they kind of dealt with, and they want to make the world better for folks. I was really fortunate that actually my family has been incredibly supportive of me ever since I came out up to today.
That's unusual, isn't it?
It's becoming more. I think what's unusual is that all of my family was so supportive.
Okay.
It's becoming more common that families are generally supportive, but you normally will have, one or two relatives who have something really negative to say.
Yeah.
And I didn't really have that experience.
Well, that's good.
Which is good. But I had some kind of not so great experiences in, I guess, other aspects of my life, like school kind of really sucked growing up because people said all kinds of really awful things.
Oh boy, I can imagine.
About how, and one thing that always got me is people would always say, oh, well, if I was your family, I wouldn't be accepting of you. And I'm like, well, why you gotta say that and take the right of my family to feel however they feel away and say that, well, they should feel this. So I thought that was kind of messed up. And so I had some difficulties with that growing up. But then as I got to meet other people who were gay, who were lesbian, who were bisexual, who were transgender, on and on and on, I realized that I had it actually pretty good. And I had some friends who have gone through some really awful life experiences, to physical assault, to being disowned by their family, becoming homeless, et cetera, et cetera.
Wow.
And so that kind of made me realize that there was a lot of work that I could be doing in my kind of privileged position to look back and say, well, I have a really great family support and I haven't gone through as much awful stuff that other people have. So I think I need to be working twice as hard then to make sure that other people can have a life kind of like mine was, that is, not so awful. So that's really, I think, what got me wanting to work for and within my community. Now, what brought me to HIV was a couple different things. One, I know you were talking before about music and kind of, the gay club scene and the gay music scene in the 70s and 80s. Music is super important to me. And I listen to a wide variety of music. And growing up, it's the one thing that I've always really connected to, if I felt really awful and I wanted to kind of dwell in that, I had my, terrible, super sad, make you hate yourself music playlists. But then if I wanted to pull myself out of it, I also had the type of playlist that were this music that really inspired me and that made me want to, stop feeling sorry for myself and get out there and do some great things.
Yeah.
And one of the bands I really, really had gotten into, because I'm, a suburban white boy, so obviously I have to love Queen.
Of course.
Of course, naturally. But then the more I listened to them, and the more that I was reading the story of the four members of the band, Mercury, who is an icon of mine and someone I look up to, I realized that I never lived on this planet because he died from AIDS-related illnesses. And after I learned that, when I started looking more into the epidemic, I realized that there was an entire generation of gay men like me who we've lost to this disease. And how many creators and artists and brilliant minds we have lost to this illness that we'll never get back.
Yeah.
And when I started talking to people my age about that, it was like they didn't get it. And I was like, can you imagine? Talking to folks my age, and we're on Grindr, and we're doing this, and we're hooking up with whoever we're hooking up with and whatnot. And I'm like, okay, can you imagine being yourself and enjoying your life, and within the span of a few years, half of your friends have dropped from this disease that no one knows what it is, and I guess just folks my age were like, oh, it's whatever. They talked about that in health class. I don't. It is what it is. And to me, I guess it was just like, how can we be so blasé about this when an entire generation of our community have been, gone forever, have been wiped from this earth because of this illness and this virus. So that made me realize that I was really interested in public health and really specifically in HIV.
Yeah.
And so I got involved kind of doing some awareness campaigns and talking about prevention and also talking about stigma, because another thing that's big to me is when we talk about HIV, although it can be a terrible virus and it can cause really awful things to happen to people, what I don't like is when people almost talk about people with HIV as if they're like, these evil people who are trying to infect everyone. And I'm like, no, like people who live with HIV are regular people who have a virus, and sometimes their health can be really impacted from it, but it doesn't mean that we have to be scared of them. We should be able to treat them the same way we treat anybody else. So anyways, when I transferred away from community college to get away from you, I went to a 4-year school, and there I started doing a lot of work with LGBTQ populations on campus, and I also started to do some of these awareness campaigns about HIV and AIDS. And now I actually work full-time for an HIV service organization in northern New Jersey. And so what I do is, I do a variety of things. We're a nonprofit organization, and we're a small nonprofit organization. And what I've learned about small nonprofit organizations is that even if you have a job title, you do about 8,000 different things.
Yeah, right. They
so
didn't tell you that in college.
Yeah, exactly. Right? Oh, shoot. So I'm here now, and I do a lot of stuff. But one of the main things that I get to do, that I have the privilege of doing, is talking with the clients that we serve. We serve between 350 and 400 people living with HIV every year, with case management and support groups and so on and so forth. And I get to speak with a lot of our clients. I do our support groups, so I get to talk about topics going on in their life, and how we can best support one another. And I also get to do some case management and talk to them about, educating them about what the virus is and what the progression of the illness related to the virus is. And I get to talk to them about how to best take care of their health and prevent the virus from spreading to other people.
Yeah.
So I really love what I do. Today, actually, since tomorrow is World AIDS Day, today I actually got to speak to, I want to say about 300 high school students at this HIV/AIDS summit that we had in North Jersey, and I was able to speak as a guest speaker to these students about how I got involved in this work and why it's so important to me. And it was just really awesome to be able to speak to these youth and tell them about something that, they often don't hear about, or when they do, it's just in health class where they're like, told, oh, wear a condom. That's all we're gonna. And I was able to say, there's a history with this virus and with this illness, and how it's really impacted different communities, And I mean, and as you said before, gay people are certainly not the only people who have been impacted by the virus,
right,
or continue to be impacted by the virus. In fact, what I always thought, what I think is very interesting to share since I'm in Jersey, is that Jersey is one of the few states that in the beginning of the epidemic in the 80s, right, that we were one of the only states, I think it was us, and I want to say maybe it was Hawaii, I don't remember, but there were only 2 states in the 50 states of the United States where the majority of people who were being diagnosed with HIV were actually not gay men, but instead it was folks who were using injection drugs.
Right.
And there's a whole reason for that. A lot of it has to do with the fact that the gay men in New Jersey who were being diagnosed with HIV or diagnosed with AIDS were being diagnosed with that in New York City because that's where the gay culture was. But it's interesting because there's so many other communities who have been impacted, and I think that is also why, I guess being controversial, right? I need to do that since I'm on your show now.
Let's do it.
So I personally don't believe that the virus was necessarily created or intended to be like a biological kind of warfare or whatnot.
Right.
But I think that once it became known, it kind of began to act in that way because, and I don't necessarily think it's a conspiracy to say that the government had no interest in dealing with HIV because it was mostly killing gay men, Black communities, and communities who were dealing with addiction.
Right.
Right. And I think that is why it took them so long to finally get involved and do something. And that's why today the government does fund a lot of programs such as the nonprofit I work for. They do provide a lot of funding for HIV/AIDS services. And I think that it's important that they do that. And when I tell people why they do that, one of the reasons that I say I think we have to hold them accountable to do that is because they are in large part a cause of how bad the epidemic got.
Right.
If they had been able to support people who wanted to do research and figure out what the hell was going on, we would have lost a lot of people, but we might not have lost as many as we have.
Right.
And so I think that's interesting. And another thing with this, which I had to talk about. All right. So anyway, so that's in the U.S., right? We know that HIV/AIDS is a global issue.
It is.
And we know that specifically in sub-Saharan Africa, we see a lot of issues with HIV and AIDS. Did you know? So oftentimes when people talk about sub-Saharan Africa, a lot of people think that sub-Saharan African cultures are very homophobic by nature. And there's some truth to saying that there are countries in Africa that have homophobic laws on the books today. That is absolutely true.
Right.
But what a lot of people don't know is that a lot of these cultures were not really raised to be homophobic. It was actually that a lot of white Christian ministries were going over during the AIDS crisis into Africa to say that they would be providing, medical help and prevention education. And they did those things. But as they were doing those things, they also villainized different groups.
Of course.
One of which was gay men. And because of that, that is now why, because, when you're in a country where, in the United States, HIV/AIDS really ravaged certain communities, specifically, New York City, Los Angeles, a lot of these major cities, right? But some states and area, almost no diagnosis of HIV happening. In places like, a lot of countries in sub-Saharan Africa, it was like you couldn't escape it. It was happening everywhere. And it really completely ravaged these cultures and these countries. And so when these, Christian ministries would go over there, they would be able to put the blame on, it's all these people who are gay and having gay sex, and they're sinning, and they're the devil, and this is God's punishment for the fact that they're in your communities, and that's why this virus is spreading. And while then these cultures and communities were able to get some prevention they also got these really awful negative messages, and that is now why a lot of these cultures are really homophobic, because they've basically been taught to be that way by ministries from the U.S. that went over there.
Jesus hates fags.
Yeah, exactly, right?
Oh, man.
Even though we know, if we really look at the Bible, there's a lot of homoeroticism in the Bible.
Oh, there is.
A lot of the men in there. Yeah.
Well,
so,
let's
and also, not for nothing, but I mean, come on, look at Jesus. He had long hair, wore gladiator sandals, and wore a flowy robe. There was something going on there.
Oh, gay AF.
I know, we know. Come on, let's be real.
So let's talk about it historically for a moment, because I said this earlier. What I think is new to the world is the celebration of the LGBT community, and being so open about it and so outward. But being gay, lesbian, transgender, crossdresser, all these things are really have been with us for a very, very long time, haven't they? What can you tell us about the LGBT community historically speaking?
Sure. So one of the things that I love that you had mentioned before was the fact that LGBTQ populations and people have been around for forever. For folks who might not know, when I say LGBTQ, there's a lot of different acronyms. I just like that one because it's short, and I think the Q counts for everything. But that stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and the Q is for queer, which used to be kind of more of a negative term. It's now been reclaimed in a lot of ways to be a little more positive, and it kind of can be a catch-all term. So one thing that I think is super important to tell people is that LGBTQ folks have existed throughout history and throughout cultures. A lot of people, when we talk about trans identities, a lot of people are like, I don't know what's going on today, why so many people identify as trans, this and that. And the fact is that in an American culture, which is a very kind of very Western European kind of culture, a lot of those cultures had two gender roles, but there have been cultures throughout history that have had more than two gender roles. A lot of Native American cultures have had three. The third of which has often been referred to as two-spirit.
Two-spirit, that's right.
Yeah, and a lot of folks who are two-spirit have often been described as having the strength of a man and the gentleness of a woman, and they're able to hold very specific and very revered roles in their cultures. Mm-hmm. And we see a lot of these identities as well throughout the world. So we also see in India and in Pakistan, we see the Hijra community, which is like a third gender community that's kind of similar to how we view trans women in the United States today, but was viewed a little differently there. In Filipino culture, there were 5 gender roles.
Really?
And yes, there were, yeah. I don't know all of them offhand, but I know the one that I've heard the most about was called the Fa'afafine, which was basically like a kind of a middle of the road gender identity, where it was like you're not necessarily man or woman. And I thought that was really cool.
So is that gender fluid? Is that
kind of? Yeah, kind of. I mean, it's somewhat hard to map historical cultural identities to the identities we have today, because even so, for example, here's a great thing. The concept of heterosexuality has only existed for the past few hundred years. Straight people have existed throughout all of history, but we have never categorized straight people as necessarily being the default,
right?
Until I want to say about maybe 200-300 years ago. Even though it was in some ways the de facto kind of most people were, but the way that heterosexuality exists today with the nuclear family and the way that relationships are supposed to be and things like that, that in itself is kind of its own newer concept. So with that in mind, LGBTQ folks have existed throughout history and have been revered, have been treated like normal people, and have been exiled and treated awfully at different times and in different cultures. Now, when we're talking about the U.S., oftentimes people start talking about, LGBTQ rights history as kind of starting with Stonewall, right? The Stonewall Riot. But that is not necessarily the case. There is a lot of really great history of LGBTQ folks in the United States throughout, our very short existence as a country. And I say our just because I belong to the country. It's not a nationalistic kind of a thing. I'm not really necessarily a fan in the country, but sometimes that slips out when I say, whatever. I believe in, no borders, no walls. We should, countries just mess everything up, and we have these weird things.
You'll fit right in here then. There's a little history.
But sometimes
I gave a link here at Wikipedia for the Stonewall riots for anybody who may not be familiar.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I love that. So Stonewall is really, really important to kind of the mainstream understanding of LGBTQ history in the United States. But the fact is that Stonewall did not start the LGBTQ rights movement here in the United States, and it has been going on for as long as we have existed, really. We as in LGBTQ people. Right. I just didn't want to keep saying, the same letters over and over. So two other things that happened around the same time as Stonewall, but beforehand, that I encourage everyone to check out if you're interested in the history, is to check out Compton's cafeteria riots and to check out Cooper's Donuts. Both of those were riots very similar to Stonewall, but they happened on the West Coast even before Stonewall happened.
Huh.
So what all these riots have in common were that they were locations, whether they be bars, restaurants, snack joints, whatever. They were locations where trans people and gay people and lesbians and bisexual folks and so on and so forth would hang out. And eventually these locations were raided for, the authorities would give one reason, but we all knew that truthfully it was because they didn't like gay people and they wanted to rough them up, abuse them, and tell them that you're not welcome here. Right. In fact, one thing that's interesting with Stonewall is that at the time in New York City, there was actually a law in the books that said that you could be arrested for impersonation if you were not wearing at least 3 articles of clothing that matched the gender or sex on your identification.
Really?
So, yes. So a lot of folks at Stonewall would get arrested for issues like that. And what's very interesting, too, is that at that time in New York City, drag performers would actually make sure that they would wear quote unquote men's underwear and, at least have 3 things that were men's clothing. Like they would wear a men's watch, men's underwear, and a men's undershirt.
And a watch counts.
And then have certain things like that. And it's so bizarre that we had a rule about this. Like, why would anyone ever want to legislate what you can and can't wear? But,
well, they're still doing now.
They still do, exactly. We see
Wildwood, New Jersey. You can't wear saggy pants.
Exactly. Yeah, we see now criminalizing a lot of different folks. If I want to stay on the LGBTQ topic, we see that schools. So there's a school to prison pipeline, and we know that exists for Black communities and communities of color, and it also exists for trans communities, because what we're seeing is a lot of schools not only will be placing certain bathroom rules about what bathroom people can and can't use, they also are placing rules about what folks can and can't wear. So if a trans student comes in wearing clothing that makes them feel comfortable, but the school says, well, that doesn't match what we have on your record, you can't wear that here, they're now disciplining that student, that child, and that kind of is playing into this school to prison pipeline that trans folks are dealing with, because
I can see why. Yes.
They deal with harassment and discrimination in the schools, and when they say something, or fight back, they're not the victim, they're the perpetrator,
right.
They're the person who gets punished for it.
Right.
So we see things like that happening, and like you said too, we see still anyone who's determined, who's kind of labeled the non-desirable is going to have things that are put into law to criminalize them. And we are seeing that also happen with communities of color, with you can't wear saggy pants certain places, you can't wear do-rags certain places, you can't wear Black women can't wear natural hair at their job. We see a lot of these things that are kind of letting people know where they stand in the world. Are you are you in the in group or are you in the out group? And we want to legislate you out of existence. Yeah. Right. And so anyway, so I got off on a little bit of a tangent, but I guess the history that I'm trying to say is that people talk about Stonewall a lot, but there's so much other stuff that's been going on. There were, there's a whole lot of really great groups, but I don't want to get, bogged down for too long in it. I encourage folks to look up, like I said, Compton's Cafeteria,
right.
Cooper's Donuts.
Cooper's Donuts.
Look up the Mattachine Society, Mattachine. I don't know why I just said that when I have a keyboard in front of me.
Yes, feel free to type,
I'll type that in a second. Check out the Mattachine Society, the Daughters of Bilitis. Really amazing organizations. STAR, Street Transvestites Action Revolutionaries. These are all wonderful LGBTQ groups who have been doing amazing work in the history of the United States. And when I say amazing work, I mean, they were talking about things that really, really matter. I think a lot of folks, I'm pro marriage equality. I think anyone should be able to, marry whoever they want, as long as it's, consensual and age appropriate and blah, blah, blah. I'm also like, if you want to marry more than one person, I don't know why you can't screw it. Like, whatever.
I'm with you on that.
Have a good time. You know what I mean? But one of the things I didn't like was that when the mainstream LGBTQ kind of movement was focusing so recently on marriage equality, well, who does marriage benefit? generally speaking, it benefits middle class to upper class individuals who can actually get married. It's not doing anything for trans women who are homeless and don't have a job because everyone says, well, you're not a woman, so you can't come to the women's shelter, and you can't get a job because you can't look like that, right? Marriage doesn't affect them. Marriage doesn't affect, the poor, gay youth of color who was kicked out of his house by his family because they weren't accepting of him, who is now, turned to sex work to make money and has just recently been diagnosed with HIV. He doesn't care about marriage equality. That doesn't affect him. So I think that there's a lot of really great history of organizations doing work that I think is really, really important. But sometimes when you look into, LGBTQ organizations, you see groups like, the Human Rights Campaign, who I will give some credit, and say they have done some work that's important, and they bring visibility, and that's the good thing about, large national nonprofit organizations.
Yeah.
But the downside is we have this, nonprofit industrial complex that, it's supposed to help people, but who does it end up helping? And, is it actually doing the work that needs to be done? And so on and so forth. So check out, I'll type some of them up in a second.
Sure. So you've brought up a lot of good points here, and there's a lot of questions
so
running.
I was going to cap that little history there because I don't want to keep people too.
No, that's okay. No, this is great. Listen, history, we're all about a history lesson on Hanging with Who, believe me. I love where you're going with this. It's more than I even anticipated. I want to bring it a little bit more to modern times, though. Let's do some time traveling and come back a little bit to the now. You and I have some years between us, okay? I don't want to date I don't want to date myself here, but we went to college together, but I was what you call a non-traditional student, and I was a lot older than most of you whippersnappers. And something I find interesting, like as I said, I've grew up very exposed to the LGBT community because of my mother and because of my involvement as a DJ and in the New York club scene. So it was never really, all that shocking and crazy to me to be surrounded by gay people and drag queens and club kids and such. But I didn't really attend high school. I dropped out of 8th grade. So I didn't have, I couldn't tell you in the 80s, what it was like to be a straight kid in high school and maybe be friends with gay kids or whatever. I didn't have that experience. So I have to fast forward to my experience in college as a grown up. And I have a feeling that it's very different today to grow up gay in America than it would have been when I was a kid. Because even just having gone to middle school and junior high school, I can tell you that it was, there was no such thing as kids being out. I mean, there were certainly a couple kids I could think of that we all knew were gay or gonna be gay, but it wasn't talked about. There was no safe spaces. There were no organizations. There were no TV shows for them. As you said, like there were tons of icons, like people like Freddie Mercury, but that wasn't talked about. That wasn't so, it wasn't okay to sit down and say like, hey, Freddie Mercury is one of my heroes because he's gay and so am I. So I feel like, and you said, you had a very supportive family, which is probably unusual for most people who come out at a very young age. So I want to see if maybe you can kind of talk about that a little bit and what it's, if I don't know if you can compare, if that's fair to ask, but at least if you can talk about how you think it might be different growing up gay today as opposed to how it has been historically speaking in modern times.
Sure. I think that it's in some ways it's kind of hard to compare because overall I think that there's more visibility of LGBTQ identities and communities, and that there therefore is also a little bit of a greater acceptance. So I think oftentimes people will say, oh well, it must be so much easier to be gay today or to be trans today than it was however many years ago. And in some ways that might be true because there is generally more acceptance, or if there is not, there's more visibility that you can take action and perhaps evoke change.
Right
30 years ago, if you were treated like crap for coming out as trans in your high school, well, first off, there wasn't really a term for it necessarily 30 years ago. And secondly, but if you were made fun of because you wore clothes that didn't, match the sex you were assigned at birth, they might you might have some problems, but you might not have been able to do anything about it. Whereas today, if you have some problems, there is visibility and there are kind of national and grassroots coalitions of people who can come to your aid and kind of try to help and support you. So that's a positive thing. But then on the flip side, I think the proliferation and the ridiculousness with which technology has rapidly evolved over the past several years can be also have positive things, but also have some really negative things. So one of the positive things that I see is that it's now so much easier to find other people like you who share your identities or are part of the same communities as you because of the internet,
right?
You know, and you can gain support in that way. On the flip side, though, it is so much easier for your own personal business and information to get into the hands of the wrong person and be shared with your school, with your family, with your place of worship, with your community, your job, what have you. And I've seen that happen, you know, quite a few times where people have been outed, you know, so to speak. People have said, oh, this person's trans, this person's gay, whatnot, because of, you know, a social media circle that they both run in, or information like that. Or, you know, they got their, you know, nude sent to them on a dating app, and now they're putting it on blast for everyone to see. Not only, oh, now you can see what this person looks like naked, but also they're gay, you know, have fun with that. So I think it's hard to compare, because there are certain things that I think are certainly easier and others that I think make it a little harder. Also, I think that with visibility sometimes comes even more animosity. So folks who are really against something, when there's more visibility of that community, that identity, what have you, the folks who are really against it are going to, you know, be a little more vocal and talk about it a little more. So I think that's also a negative thing. And lastly, I guess too, the other thing is, with it being so visible, it's like if you have stereotypically gay traits, it can be hard to hide them, or hard to hide the fact that you're gay.
Right.
Whereas 30 years ago, people might assume things, you know, but if you, like 30 years ago, people might have assumed that I was gay, but if I was going out with Sally and everything was good with me and Sally, people were like, oh, okay, he's just a little weird, but he's straight, and might leave it alone. Whereas today, people might be like, oh, that's his beard, you know, we all know, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, so I don't know. I feel like it's a little hard to compare. But it's interesting to see that we have come so very far, but we also have not come very far at all.
Yeah, I can't imagine. I mean, you know, I've been immersed in a lot of aspects of our Western culture and society with people who kind of have gotten the shit end of the stick. You know, I always say I grew up black, and as you know, I grew up immersed in LGBT community. So I mean, here's two communities right there that have really had a really hard time, and I think in many respects still do today. So.
And the overlap too, the overlap between, you know, Black communities and gay communities, and the very specific culture that Black gay communities have, you know, provided for, you know, everyone, is also really, really important and really interesting. Sorry, I just cut you off.
No, that's okay. Please, this is actually your show. As I say to all my guests, you know, you're on, when you're on the air with me, this is your show. So anytime you want to chime in, anything that pops up, insert gay joke here. So let's talk about let's go back and talk about the entertainment business a little bit. We kind of touched on that. It's something I mentioned earlier, and you mentioned, for instance, Freddie Mercury is one, you know, an icon to you. That's something like I've never had to really think about it much or put it into perspective, that, you know, the gay community has like these cultural icons and heroes, especially since, you know, I grew up throughout the 80s and 90s where it still wasn't really, it was still kind of a taboo subject. And even if you kind of knew that there was a celebrity that was gay, it wasn't really, you know, celebrated and talked about the way it is today. So it's very different in the media and mainstream today. It's more accepted. And so I'm you know, it's something I'm curious about. I'm wondering like what it's like to have like these gay cultural icons, and I'm also wondering, you know, you being a gay man, we're kind of like sticking a little bit to that topic, but you work in the LGBT community, which is more than just gay men.
Yes.
Yeah. So what do you have to say on that?
Sure. So, well, one of the things that I think is interesting when we talk about gay icons, sometimes I've had to have conversations with people about, how Diana Ross is a gay icon, or how Judy Garland is a gay icon, or so on and so forth. And people are like, "Oh, but she's not
Oh,
gay."
Judy Garland.
And I'm
Wow.
like,
That's a name I would
"Yeah,
never
Judy."
have even thought. Yeah.
Oh no, yeah, she's. Oh my God. At one point in time, to find out if someone was gay, like the question was, "Are you a friend of Dorothy's?" And if you were, which was
Oh,
Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz, because
right.
of how much Judy Garland was like an icon. Um,
And that's something.
so yeah, right. You learn something new every day.
Yep.
So with that in mind, sometimes I tell people about these icons, and they're like, "Oh, but so and so's not gay. How are they a gay icon?" And what is interesting is the first gay icons were not gay. Most of them were straight women, and that was because there were no gay people in the media or no people that were out and gay in the media.
Sure.
And the closest thing that folks had oftentimes were women in the media, because they could see that women in society were not treated the same way gay men were by any means, but that they were also sometimes and often treated as less than, or they were relegated to certain roles in the media.
Sure.
And so a lot of gay men looked up to these women, and that is where a lot of the American drag history comes from. A lot of it was trans women who the only jobs that they could get at one point in time were being a drag queen or being a sex worker. And so a lot of trans women became sex workers, and a lot said, well, I'm going to work in the bars and become a drag queen. But outside of trans women who were drag queens, a lot of gay men became drag queens because they wanted to emulate their icons. And that's kind of what they did. So I wanted to just start off with that to say that, for me, gay men as icons are there's a lot. A lot of the first icons were not even LGBTQ at all, which was interesting. Like Bette Midler got her start in gay bathhouses and performing for gay men who were.
That's right. I actually knew that. Yeah. Doing whatever they do in a gay bathhouse. Gee,
I don't know what that is.
I can only imagine.
Scrub-a-dub-dub.
Stop it. Knock it off.
But I also love what you just talked about, and saying that I've talked a lot about gay men, and I think that one of the things that we see, especially with kind of mainstream conversations about LGBTQ people, is that the history has really focused on gay men. Specifically, there are a lot of lesbians who have done amazing work for the community. There are so many trans individuals, trans men, trans women, genderqueer people, etc., who have done such amazing work. There's so many bisexual individuals or pansexual or other identities that kind of fall under that umbrella.
Yeah.
And without getting too much into that, bisexuality, it comes from, I like men and women, right? Or any two genders. There's kind of an umbrella under that talks about being attracted to multiple genders, right? So some people might say they're pansexual because they're like, oh, I'm attracted to everybody, and I recognize that people might identify as not a man or a woman, and I can still be attracted to them. And some bisexual people will also say the same thing, but they choose the term bisexual for different reasons. But I just wanted to, say that. So anyways, there are so many people who are bisexual, pansexual, non-monosexual, if you will, attracted to more than one type of gender, type of person, type of genitalia, whatever you want to say.
Right.
And there are so many folks with those identities who also have been erased and who have done such amazing work. Like Freddie Mercury actually identified as bisexual. And in the mainstream kind of conversation about him, a lot of people, are like, oh, he's a gay man, and he was with this girl for a while, but it was just a cover. But if you really listen to a lot of the stuff that he said, he was really in love with this woman whose name I cannot remember.
Okay.
Because I guess I'm a misogynist now. But for the life of me, I cannot remember her name right now. But he was in a relationship with her for a very long time, and has said even to his deathbed that she was one of the loves of his life. And people often forget that and will erase that, and because they want to say, oh, well, he was gay. That was a cover. But he loved this woman, and he was actually bisexual. And that's important to kind of, note about him. But then there are so many other people who have gotten relegated to history. You know, when we talk about gay men and gay folks in the media, people are always like, "Oh my God, I love Will and Grace," and I do too. It's my favorite sitcom. But it's like, okay, the world is not just white gay men who are funny. There are, you know, people of color who are trans and who are queer and who have done amazing things in the ballroom community and who really did a lot of major things that are now popular in drag culture.
Right.
We now live in a world where RuPaul's Drag Race is about to be having its 11th season next year.
Wow.
And it's become this cultural phenomenon. And a lot of the culture that is shown on that show comes from the culture that LGBTQ people of color created in this ballroom scene, right? People like Willie Ninja, people like Venus Extravaganza, people like, oh my gosh, Pepper LaBeija, you know, there are so many amazing icons who are gay, who are bisexual, who are transgender, who are none of the above, who don't fit into a label, who have done such amazing stuff for this community, but aren't necessarily given the same amount of praise. You know, another icon. Okay, well, I have a lot of icons. I like have a lot.
Well, I'll tell you.
I guess since you know.
I'll tell you real quick. One of my heroes is actually a very gay man, Genesis P.
Okay.
So if anybody's familiar, Psychic TV, because of course my history in electronic music, and he's a pioneer, one of the early electronic music pioneers, and I'm sure he's probably an icon in the gay community as well.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yeah, and that's the thing. There are so many, you know, especially in I want to say, especially in just like culture in general. Queer folks have always been pushing the boundaries because they push the boundaries of what it meant to be in love, what it meant to be a person, what it meant to, you know, be who you are. And so because they were pushing so many social boundaries, they often would start pushing those boundaries in the art world as well.
Sure.
And that's my personal opinion about why I think so many LGBTQ folks have done such amazing stuff in media, in art, in music, et cetera, et cetera.
That makes sense. I don't mean to cut you off, but you made me kind of think of something there for a moment, and I think about how many gay people are in the entertainment business, musicians and artists, people like Keith Haring, for instance, with his art, and you meant because what you mentioned how like they were pushing the boundaries of what it meant to be in love, right? And throughout the years, like it's something that they kind of in their day-to-day lives very often probably struggled with and had to hide. So their art form may have been a way to truly become expressive from deep within, and maybe that's why there are so many LGBT people in the arts who have pushed boundaries and have kind of pushed art to another level. It's just something that occurred to me while you were talking.
Yeah, and I think that certainly plays a role, and a lot of folks, art form became an outlet, and I think that we can see that with any community that has dealt with any type of oppression, right?
Yeah,
we see a lot of really amazing art, coming out of communities who are people of color, from communities that are, really poor, underprivileged, from communities who've been dealing with addiction and no one cared until, white people started doing heroin.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
oh, I know.
Yeah, we see all this amazing artwork. And I think a lot of it is because, like, kind of, in my opinion, I think the human condition, artwork is a way to kind of heal the soul and, try to get to the heart of the human condition. And I think that's why a lot of these communities that have been hurting at one time or another have been so influential to a lot of these artistic movements.
Yeah.
And I, since we're on a channel where I guess I can be you can.
Please do.
Is Chelsea Manning.
I made a note. Her. I was gonna mention Chelsea Manning. I was waiting for to move on to the next topic, but since you brought it up, yes. Also one of my heroes. He was when he was Bradley Manning, and I still have a tremendous respect for Chelsea Manning. There'd be no reason for that to change, of course. But yeah, I'd love to hear you talk about that. That's I've only ever talked about Chelsea or Bradley Manning in the scope of conspiracies and this sort of, the political scope, but never in this vein. So yeah, please tell us.
What I love about, so one of the things in my community that I really am passionate about is looking at how LGBTQ people are treated by and within the quote unquote justice system, which, we know it's not really a justice system,
Right.
but that's what they want to call it. So I'll pretend for a second. And so Chelsea, and Chelsea is one of the individuals who I really look up to, and who is, I think, an amazing figure in the community to talk about not only how trans people are treated in general, but how trans people are so awfully treated in the prison industrial complex. Another icon of mine who talks about the same thing is Cece McDonald. For those of you who don't know the story of Cece McDonald, she's a Black trans woman who was attacked because she's a Black trans woman outside of, she was walking home from a liquor store, attacked by somebody who had a knife. She ended up, I believe, breaking a bottle and attacking this person so bad that this person ended up dying.
Wow.
But she was protecting herself from this person who was attacking her, and she didn't know what was going to happen. And to be a trans person in a world that we know does not like trans people per se is scary enough. But to be a poor Black trans woman, it can be really scary.
My God.
We also see in the United States a lot of the violence against trans community is specifically targeting Black trans women or trans women of color. So she did what she felt she had to. She protected herself. This person ended up dying. She got arrested, charged for, I don't know what degree the charge was, but she got charged for murder. And, she was on trial, and she was like, this person was attacking me. I was defending myself. She ended up being convicted and then sent to prison. And in prison, she was sent to a men's prison.
Of course.
And then she had all these terrible things done to her. They would put her in solitary confinement because they would claim that it was protecting her against the other individuals, even though we know that solitary confinement is recognized as a form of torture.
Yeah.
And, she was not given the medications that she needed. She was already on hormones for her transition. They took her off while she was there. They didn't give her the medical treatment that she had needed. And it was really awful. And she now also talks about that. So I love.
Is she out of prison now? Is she?
Cece McDonald is out of prison now, yes, and she has talked at quite a few different organizations, at colleges, about the issues that she faced and trying to make a better world for all of us.
Wow.
While focusing on her own community. I love her. She's awesome. If y'all can go, if y'all want to, I'll type her name in the thing as well. Check, you can YouTube Cece McDonald and hear her talk. She has some really great things to say. I love her. And I love Chelsea Manning as well, because I think what I like most about Chelsea Manning, right, is not only how she talked about how awful she was treated in the prison system when she came out as trans, and things related to that, but, from her whistleblowing and talking about all these different things that were going on that people, the military didn't want us to know, and then talking about those things, and then talking about trans issues, and then talking about the prison industrial complex. What I love about her is that she strings these things together and sees how the systems we have in place cause a lot of these things, right? We have systems that are not only racist by nature, but also are transphobic by nature, and also are, violent by nature and want to keep us sedated, and being okay with everything, so they can make decisions about, what country we're going to go invade next, who we're going to go kill next, and who is no longer deemed a person, who are we going to dehumanize next, right? And I really love that when she talks about things, she really strings all these different things together, and how a lot of our society kind of, teaches us these things, I guess. And I love her. And also I love that she's controversial, even in the LGBTQ community, not in the circles I run in. In the circles I run in, they're all like, oh, I love her. But, mainstream, LGBTQ communities feel some sort of way about her. And that's one of the things that kind of bugs me. And what also bugs me is when I meet, gays for Trump, I'm like, what is wrong with you?
What an oxymoron.
Literally. Well, I mean, there were also, for the record, not that I'm directly trying to compare or whatever, but make whatever opinions you want to. There were also gay individuals who were, very high ranking in the SS under Hitler.
Right.
And he was cool with them until the night of the long knives, when he killed them and then slandered their name for being gay. But he was totally fine when they served the purpose that he needed them to. And then as soon as they were done serving that purpose, he said, flip that switch. You're no longer a person. I've now dehumanized you.
Wow.
You're on the margins. We're going to kill you. We're going to put all these gay people in camps. Another interesting thing while I'm on that topic, because I'm very interested in the Holocaust and World War II and whatnot. Following when folks were released from camps, everyone who was in the camps who was released did not have to serve the rest of their what was considered their prison time, except for gay men. They were released from the camps, but then they were sent into prisons in Germany to do the rest of their prison time in a prison. Also, gay men were, although they were by far not the main people who were targeted, they were often the first people to be voluntold for these awful medical experiments during that time as well.
Wow. So
that's the previous history that I'm very interested in. So I like to talk about that too. I love Chelsea. And one of the things that bugs me about the LGBTQ community is that because there has been some mainstream acceptance, some people in the community no longer want to push boundaries and are now okay with, going along with the status quo. They're now okay going, oh, okay, well, I can get married and I can, adopt in certain places and people are okay with it. So I don't need to talk about police violence. That doesn't affect me.
Right.
I don't need to talk about why the military industrial complex is awful.
Right.
I don't need to talk about the prison industrial complex. These things don't matter, And when people want to push the boundaries, there are now some gay people even who are like, oh, you shouldn't do that. We should be, looking just like the people who oppressed us, so
right?
We can live happy lives.
Be happy with what you've got. Like stop rattling cages and pushing. I get
exactly.
I didn't realize that was an issue in the community.
Oh, I mean, I certainly think so. I mean, there's a conversation now that happens about cops at Pride events, and my personal opinion is I don't want cops at my Pride events because generally how it goes is a lot of people who look like me feel safe if there are cops there because they know that cops aren't necessarily going to today pick on the white gay guy, right? But we know that cops are responsible for a lot of violence against a lot of people of color in our community, a lot of trans people in our community, a lot of people who deal with addiction in our community, a lot of different things. And how many innocent people have cops killed in the past year? How many of them were LGBTQ people, et cetera, et cetera? About, while we're on the topic, about 40% to 50% of cops are also, domestically abused their partners.
Right.
And so there's a conversation, and the most vulnerable in our communities, which are generally trans people, gender nonconforming people, LGBTQ people of color, often say, I don't want cops at Pride. They don't make me feel safer. They make me feel less safe.
Yeah.
Right? And that's like a controversial opinion because there are so many mainstream gay people who were like, oh, well, there are, LGBTQ cops and they deserve respect too and blah, blah, blah. Meanwhile, I'm like, well, all cops are, the pawns of an unjust system.
Yeah,
blah, blah, blah.
I'm with you. I think we're on the same page regarding law enforcement. It's a topic. It's definitely a hot topic on the show. I don't want to go off too much off topic, but definitely a good point.
Yeah.
No, it's a great point. Great thing. These are, that's one of the things that I was so excited about tonight. Is this is a topic that there isn't much I can lend to this conversation other than whatever observations and experiences I've had, however limited, and although albeit I've been exposed to the LGBT community for a very long time. But it's not often that, and this is something you and I talked about before we got on the air, it's not often that people are willing to sit down and have this kind of a conversation in the public purview. I think that even in 2018, as accepting and tolerant as society has become, it is still in a lot of circles very taboo. I mean, I live in the deep South in the Bible Belt where it's still not even okay to be black, let alone gay. Yeah. But there is a humongous gay and especially gay black community, particularly in Atlanta. I happen to know that for
yes.
One of the biggest gay clubs I'd ever DJ'd in actually was in Atlanta back in the 90s, and talk about a party.
Yes. We know how to party, and especially in LGBTQ circles or communities of color, they really know how to party. Because not only are they like, well, the world already hates me because I'm a person of color. Now they also hate me because I'm gay. Screw it. I'm going to throw a real good party, have a real good time, right?
Yeah. And I mean, some of my greatest influences in electronic music are actually gay black men from Detroit and Chicago. A lot of the pioneers of house and techno are gay black men. I want to backtrack a little bit just because I put a link in the chat here. Her name escaped you, but it looks like, oddly enough, Freddie Mercury's love, the woman he loved so much, her name was Mary Ausitin. And so I put in...
I'm a true misogynist if I forgot the woman's name who shares my name.
Yeah. So I've got a link there from biography.com if anybody's interested. And you did mention they were mentioning in the chat, I think Krim had brought up RuPaul, and then you actually did mention RuPaul. And I have a tremendous amount of respect for RuPaul. I don't, I only know the very early music that she came out with because there were some house remixes that were huge in the underground house scene, and the when she says "you better work," that's been sampled over and over and over again in house music, and I happen to love that sample. It really gets people dancing. But yeah, I'm glad you brought her up. I didn't realize until many years later that she's really just a very mainstream cultural icon. I imagine a lot of straight people watch that show.
Yes. So actually, my mother and I watch RuPaul's Drag Race together. So my family's very supportive. In fact, sometimes we go to drag shows together. And when I don't want to age myself and say how young I was when RuPaul's Drag Race started, but I started watching it season 1, and I told my mom, "Oh, I'm so excited to watch this show. It's about drag queens competing in this reality competition, and this really big drag queen named RuPaul is going to be hosting it." And my mom said, "Oh, of course I know RuPaul. I watched her talk show in the 90s all the time." And I'm like, oh my God, like what? And like it also dawned on me, like, wow, like Ru was really one of the first, I want to say, like transgressive gay icons who became mainstream. And what's so interesting is that she was so transgressive when she became super popular in the 90s. And now she's not as transgressive or as progressive as a lot of other folks in the community are.
Right.
And I think that's interesting to see, how things change, how society changes and how what's acceptable changes. Because now drag is pretty mainstream, but she said some things about trans women that have not been super progressive, right? She said that she doesn't want trans women competing on Drag Race if they've already gone through hormone therapy replacement or had breast implants or so on and so forth, because she kind of equated that to someone who was like doping their blood at the Olympics or using performance enhancing drugs.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't necessarily agree with that, because I'm like, good tits does not a good drag queen make. Like, you know what I mean? You got to be a good performer too.
Right.
And also, once again, I think people who use performance enhancing drugs for the Olympics, they don't do it because that's who they are and what they need to do to feel comfortable. They do it because they want to do better at what they're competing in.
Yeah.
Trans people do not take hormones and have all these surgeries that cost them a lot of money and could go wrong because they just think it's a good idea and it would help their job. These folks do these things because they feel like this is what I need to do to be comfortable in my own skin, my own body. And while we're on that topic also, while many trans people will go on hormones and will have different surgeries, I would like to point out that not all trans people do. I have a very good friend who is trans who has had, he's a trans man. He has had what is considered top surgery. So he has had his breasts removed. So he has a flat chest. He has never been on testosterone, and he has no interest in going on the hormone testosterone, which is interesting because a lot of trans men do. And most people think that if you're trans, you have to go on hormones and you have to have these surgeries. But it's a case-by-case thing about how people feel with their body. I know some trans people who say, I love my body. I just wish that people in the community could respect that my body does not match their expectation of a woman's or of a man's. And they have no interest in changing it, which is not necessarily the norm. I like to bring that up because I think sometimes we have an idea of what exactly trans identities would look like and what that would be for people, but that is is often a very personal thing and different for each person.
Wow. So real quick, Krim mentioned the reason she brought up RuPaul was because apparently Diana Ross was responsible for giving RuPaul a shot. I was not aware of that. I'm not sure if you were. But Krim actually just...
I knew that. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, that's okay. Just real quick, Krim kind of blew my mind here in her typing. She mentioned Amanda Lepore and Lady Bunny. I don't know if you are familiar with those two names.
Oh, of course I am.
Those are two...
I'm a freaking homo.
Well, listen, you fucking homo. Those are two people who I grew up with in the New York scene. I actually knew Amanda Lepore and Lady Bunny very, very well for many, many years. I hung out with them. I did a lot of drugs with them. So you kind of just blew my mind there, Krimmy. So go on.
Can I tell you that this past year at RuPaul's DragCon, so now we live in a world where drag is so profitable and mainstream that they can have a whole convention on it. But
wow.
One of the things I would like to say is I went to a panel, and the panel had Suzanne Bartsch, Amanda Lepore, and Michael Musto on it.
Michael Musto, okay, yeah.
Yeah, Michael Musto. Oh my God.
From The Village Voice.
Amazing. Yes. I was in heaven. I was like, oh my God, Suzanne Bartsch is in front of me. Oh, and she came in her full club kid attire. I was living. Amanda Lepore was there, who I've been in her presence, and every time I see her, I'm just like, I am in God's presence. Like, God is a woman. Thank you, Ariana Grande, and that woman is Amanda Lepore.
I never thought of her that way. I've literally hung out with these two, and not just them. I could probably mention quite a few names of people you might be familiar with from the club kid days, like Richie Rich, and of course I hung out with Michael Allig, and something I'm not terribly proud of. but
look, not everyone. You didn't necessarily know what was going on.
Oh, I kind of knew. I knew a lot. I knew way more than I should have, and I was actually in that apartment that where they hacked the body up many times.
Oh my God, no.
I don't believe I ever set foot in the apartment after they hacked up the body, because I don't recall seeing a big television box in the middle of the room, and that's the way the story goes. But I knew Angel very, very well, and for the audience people who might not be familiar with what I'm talking about, you might want to check out the movie Party Monster with Macaulay Culkin, and there's also a real life documentary about the real story. Michael Allig was a club kid, one of the first most influential club kids in the New York City club scene, which kind of crossed over into the rave scene a little bit. He did weekly parties at the famous club Limelight, owned by Peter Gatien, and then eventually, after many years of very, very, very heavy drug use and all kinds of crazy nightlife, ultimately wound up killing someone who was a very good friend of ours. He was a scene drug dealer, but also a gay club kid by the name of Angel. He was a Hispanic kid from Uptown who actually, it was Michael Allig who suggested, because his name was Angel, that he wear the angel wings, and that was when he actually started to wear the angel wings. And I think the movie actually portrays that. I haven't seen it in quite some time. It's a little bit disturbing. It's difficult for me to watch because I lived that, and the movie's very accurate, and Macaulay Culkin does an amazing job of playing Michael Allig. I mean, it's scary.
Now, while we're talking about that, one thing I want to bring up too, because I know in the comments I saw someone mention the documentary Paris is Burning, which I encourage folks to watch if you have not. It's a wonderful documentary about the ballroom culture in New York City. But an interesting story that talking about Michael Allig just reminded me of is that there is a performer who is in Paris is Burning by the name of Dorian Corey, who it turns out had killed someone and stuffed that person in her closet. And I think was actually in the closet at the time that they were filming this documentary.
Wow.
Yes. So I feel like that's just a very interesting thing. So this is the story. I just pulled it up on Wikipedia because I want to read exactly how it went down. So this is what Wikipedia says.
Give us the link too. I didn't mean to cut you off, but give us the link as well.
Oh no, yeah, sure. Okay, so death and aftermath. On August 29th, 1993, Corey died of AIDS-related complications in Manhattan at the age of 56. After Corey's death, the mummified body of Robert Worley was found in Corey's belongings with a gunshot wound to the head investigators determined the body had been dead for about 15 years.
Wow.
It is speculated that Worley was an abusive ex-boyfriend of Corey's, or that Corey killed him in self-defense during a potential burglary. That is just a very interesting story that I always like to tell.
Wow.
When we kind about Paris burning. 15 years.
My gosh.
No one knew. That's wild.
My gosh. I wonder how long it took for the smell to kind of dissipate, because I know dead bodies smell initially pretty badly.
Yeah.
So anyway, real quick about interesting tidbit about Michael Allig. Actually, a very good mutual friend of ours had informed me when he was being released from prison that he was going to actually go and pick him up that day. This was, I guess, about 4 years ago now, maybe 5.
Wow.
And I, you know, I had a lot of mixed feelings about it at the time. I was in the very close knit circle with these people, and so much so that this individual who was going to pick him up from the prison gates, you know, actually called me, said, "Hey, I'm on my way to pick up Michael Allig." And my first reaction was, "Why?" You know, and that was kind of a lot of people's initial reaction. So, but really interesting tidbit. So a couple of years ago, they were going to start doing a weekly event in New York City of an LGBT related nightclub event, a weekly event, and they had initially reached out to Michael Allig to be a host. And I will tell you, the LGBT community and all the straight people involved in the scene, in the club scene, in the rave scene, were absolutely outraged. There was a petition. There were a number of petitions, and it was to the extent that they had to turn him down. They had to say no. They had to say, "We can't let you host this event." You know, I'm not sure how I feel about it. I mean, you know, he did the crime. He did the time. Knowing what I know about him and having kind of reviewed some more recent videos and followed him a little bit on social media, I'm not so sure that he's shown any genuine remorse or I don't know, man. There's definitely something wrong with him. There has been since day one.
Yeah, and also, I mean, I think, you know, let's be real here. You know, we also know that oftentimes, folks who have acted out in that way or in a really abusive, you know, negative way, are more likely to go back to that behavior if they end up going right back into the environment they were in when they had done that. So I'm also like, you know, even if we were saying, oh, okay, well, you know, he was remorseful and whatnot, I'm just like, it might not be the best thing for him to go into that kind of culture and community again immediately after coming out.
Yeah, well, especially knowing that a lot of the people he reconnected with, people like Richie Rich and James St. James and all these people who who remained in the lifestyle and in the culture since that day. You know, and I happen to know a lot of inside information, and I know a lot of these people still live the same kind of lifestyle that they did, you know, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, and I definitely don't think it would have been a healthy or isn't a healthy environment for someone like Michael Allig. And he was actually arrested after his release, smoking meth in a public park in New York City.
Oh, fun.
Yeah.
Fun. Meth is also a big thing in the gay community right now. It's like a big issue.
I don't know if that's right
now.
now.
I mean, I know why it's not right now, but it's been going on forever. But it's just like, I feel like it's super visible with dating apps and stuff now, because you'll see people right on there. There's different codes and stuff that they'll use to say,
yes,
let's shoot up meth and have sex for 14 hours.
So you know, that brings up an interesting thing. This is something that a lot of people probably don't talk about publicly when discussing the LGBT community. Why is sexual promiscuity so often why is that so often attributed to the LGBT community? And is it a reality? Is it a misconception? Let's talk about that, if you will.
Yeah, that's a great question. And in short, I'll say that there is some truth and some stereotyping that kind of goes with that assumption. So historically, kind of what happened was, at first, when folks were underground about their identity, pre kind of visible LGBTQ rights movements in the early 70s, late 60s, queer folks would often it was for them to have a relationship in the same way that a straight couple would have a relationship was more or less impossible because we couldn't be too visible, different things like that. That's not to say that people did not have relationships that they either were totally discreet about or that they passed off as friendships in public or things like that.
Yeah.
Did have. But it was kind of hard to have that kind of meaningful relationship in public. So with that came, the idea of kind of just meeting different people, and hooking up here and there, right? Then, following the kind of start of the queer rights movement, or when it really blew up in the early 70s, what kind of happened then was that there was this, around that same time, 70s, 60s, whatnot, there was this sexual revolution.
Right.
And so folks in the queer community were like, you know what? We can't get married. We're not going to have relationships the same way straight people will necessarily. So why don't we enjoy our sexuality and enjoy the sensuality that we have with one another? And there was this, whole big movement of, free love and all that stuff. But it really kind of, the fact that gay people couldn't get married and, have families. I mean, of course, there were some people who would, be in a relationship and that they would stay in that relationship monogamously for the rest of their life or for a period of time or whatnot. But there was also this kind of revolution that was going on that was all about, free sexuality, and we can be ourselves in public, and we don't have to be ashamed of who we are and who we love and who we are attracted to. And I think that all of those things kind of played together to create a culture where it was totally sex positive and it was totally okay for people to, have sex with so-and-so and then have sex with so-and-so as well, and, so on and so forth. And I think also then, people not using protection at that time because sure, they knew about, gonorrhea and all these other things.
Yeah.
But most of those things, they were like, oh, well, if I can get tested, I can get treatment. It is what it is. I'm not going to get pregnant. So sure, you can shoot that wherever you want to shoot it. But then what we really saw in the 80s with the AIDS crisis, there was really a split. Some organizations said, we think it's being transmitted sexually, so we have to, we can't be promiscuous and we have to use protection and this and that. And then other people said, we've worked so hard to be able to be ourselves and to be able to be okay with who we are attracted to and who we are sexually active with. Why are you now trying to tell us to not embrace that part of ourselves? So that became this big schism during the 80s, and there were kind of two factions. I mean, there were more than that. I guess there were a lot of different opinions on sides that people took, but two main factions that kind of fought between that. And so, with that in mind, and that kind of history of knowing that marriage wasn't a thing, we weren't going to be held to the same standards that straight people were, and we weren't expected to marry, have children. One of us be the stay-at-home person, one of us be the breadwinner, or whatever. And so that is kind of, I think, where some of this ability to do what we want and be a little more sexually open came from. And that's why that stereotype still kind of exists today. And it is a stereotype because there are quite a lot of gay people, LGBTQ people today, who their goal is to get into a relationship, be monogamous, marry, maybe even, adopt children or have kids with, in vitro fertilization or with a donor or whatnot, so on and so forth. But then at the same time, there's still a lot of people who are in the community who are like, I don't want to pretend to be straight, so I'm not going to try to live that kind of quote unquote straight life where I will, wife someone up or hubby someone up and, do all that. And I'm going to be free and be able to have sex with who I want. So it's interesting because in some ways it's a stereotype, but in other ways it still is, I would say probably more prevalent in our community than among straight communities. And another thing that I'll note with that too is talking about sex and who you've slept with is not nearly as taboo in my community as I've noticed it is in straight communities. I have so many friends who I met because I hooked up with them and now I'm friends with them. And sometimes I talk to my straight friends and they're like, oh my God, no. First off, I would never sleep with my friend. And if I did and it didn't become a relationship, I would never talk to them again. And second off, I would never become friends with a one-night stand. And I'm like, when I go through my phone, I'm like, I have 15 people in my contacts who I slept with. And now we go to the bar and we have a good time together.
Oh, you dog, you.
Yeah,
I thought I was bad.
I don't know what to say.
So
look, some people say that I would be a mo, but I would say that I'm more of a hoe.
Wow. So real quick, I had heard about this, and I haven't bothered to do the research to find out. Bert and Ernie, were they outed? Is this a real thing?
No. So officially, the word from either the puppeteer or like the person in charge of Sesame Street or something. Someone asked if Bert and Ernie were gay, and he said they're puppets. So apparently puppets can't have a sexuality. If you have seen the musical Avenue Q, you know that is absolutely not true. There's a lot of puppet sex in that show.
Great show. I was actually so impressed. I went to see it having no idea. I knew it was, puppets and things. I didn't really realize it was so gay centric or whatever you want to call it. It was about, but yeah, wow, what an impressive show. I'm not sure if it's still running, but it is still running off Broadway now. Yeah, I highly recommend if anybody's into musicals, or even if you're not, honestly, it's a show that you'll really, really enjoy. It's very well done.
It's very smart. It's very funny. I love it. And now, so that's the official word. I mean, we all know that Bert's the bottom, so we know what's going on there.
Well, they're puppets. They have to have something, a hand shoved up their ass at all times.
Yeah, they're both into fisting. They do double fisting. It is what it is. No, actually, I wanted to real briefly mention.
Go ahead.
One media asked about Batman and Robin,
yes,
and I just wanted to say, they are not gay. They're Catholic, because Batman is an older man running around with an underage boy, and they both wear rubber. So they're Catholic. They're not.
Makes sense. Makes sense. What about the Lone Ranger? the Lone Ranger in Tonto.
The Lone Ranger in Tonto. I actually, this is where I'm going to lose my gay card, I guess, because I don't know the answer to that. I have never really seen the Lone Ranger.
I wonder if that's the original Brokeback Mountain.
It could be. Yes.
I'll tell you real quick. I love Heath Ledger, and I wanted to see that movie. I didn't care if it was about gay men. I wanted to see it. I heard it was a great movie. And at the time, I was hanging out at a friend's apartment whose roommate was gay, and he says, "Oh, let's watch Brokeback Mountain." So I'm like, "Cool, I'm game." But he put it on and fast forwarded the movie to the sex scene immediately, and I still to this day have not been able to watch that movie.
Oh my god, that's so sad. First off, if you wanted to watch a sex scene, there's probably a gay porn parody called Bareback Mountain that you can probably find. So why would you watch? I don't get that.
Give us a link.
But anyways.
No, don't. How about, so Jack Dub says, how about Crockett and Tubbs from Miami Vice? I mean, Crockett had a kind of gay flair going on back in the day with the feathered hair and.
Yeah, but I mean, Miami, I don't know. It's like
Miami's a pretty gay city, isn't it?
Well, no, it is. But even the straight people there, you're like, oh, well, okay.
Right, right.
That's kind of like sometimes people are like, I can't tell if this guy is gay or if he's just European,
So at this time we're running up on the last 10 minutes. I'm going to put it out to the audience. If there's any question and answers, please keep it coming. Comments, jokes, what have you. And then I basically want to see if there's anything that we haven't really touched on. Anything. I know you've got some big things coming up with AIDS Awareness Day and this whole next month and the work that you do. So if there's anything pressing on your mind, now's the time to get it off.
Sure. A couple things that I just want to say, putting on my little prevention hat, I want to talk about prevention.
Please.
Tomorrow is World AIDS Day, and it's super important that everyone knows that in 2018, we know that we do have the biomedical tools to make my generation be the last generation that has to deal with HIV. We know that we have tools like condoms. We have medication that can prevent HIV. We have medication that can help people who are living with HIV live longer and not be able to transmit the virus to other people. We know all these things. But yet I also know in my heart that my generation will continue to deal with HIV and will continue to pass it on because there is a lack of an awareness, there is a lack of understanding, and there is a lack of kind of discussion about it. So one thing that I encourage everyone to do is to make sure that you are having conversations with the people you care about health in a variety of ways, and whatever that means to you. Of course, to me, I like to talk to not only the people who I'm going to be having sex with about sexual health, because I think that just makes sense, but also I talk to my friends and family member who I care about and who I know either are sexually active or who I know are using needles for injection drugs or for anything of that sort. And I talk to these folks about health because we have to have an awareness and an understanding. The next thing that I encourage everyone to do is make sure, if you have not gotten tested for HIV, I definitely encourage folks to go and get tested. If you Google free HIV testing by me, you can find free places that do testing and get it done. They do rapid testing now that can take 20 minutes or less to know your status.
Wow, that's pretty fast.
It's really, yeah, it's awesome. There's also now too, some places sell these at-home kits where you can actually test yourself at home. You don't even have to prick any blood. You swab the inside of your mouth and you wait, I want to say about 20 minutes, and you can get your results yourself too. So I tell that because I want people to know their status. It's super, super important. And the last thing I want to tell people is, while people have their own feelings about whether or not there is a cure for HIV at the moment, one thing I do want to encourage all of you and say is not a cure for HIV is if you see somebody on your Facebook or on your social media talking about some doctor they met in Africa somewhere who cured their herpes and their gonorrhea and their HIV and all these things, please know that that's bullcrap. And just one of those weird
Snake
things
oil.
that like people, yeah, exactly. It's like this weird, I don't know. Because I work for an HIV nonprofit. We have a Facebook page, and sometimes I have to go on and delete these comments.
Wow.
Because it's people who ultimately want to make money off of somebody else's negative health by fooling them into thinking that they don't have a health issue anymore, and get all this money for these home remedies that don't actually work. And that's not to say that I don't want to say that to make it people think that I'm like, don't believe in holistic things or home remedies for certain things. Because, it's definitely plays a role in a lot of things, and we know that pharmaceutical companies want to make money, right? And so that sometimes, so we know that that's a whole thing. But what I wanted to say is, HIV is a really serious illness, and that I know of, there is no homeopathic or holistic cure for it, like snake venom or I don't know, drinking the blood of a frog or whatever.
If I may chime in though, one thing I will say, because I am a huge proponent for doing things as holistically and DIY as possible, and of course HIV/AIDS is not something to take lightly, and I would definitely seek the professional medical professionals if it's something that you're worried about, but I think that living with HIV/AIDS today, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, is probably very different than it was just a decade or two ago. It's probably a lot easier. I know that there's medications that can help control the symptomology, and on the holistic side of it, I would kind of treat it the same. If it were me, I would treat it the same way I would treat cancer, where if it was an extreme situation, I would certainly seek medical professional help, but I would make very extreme lifestyle changes to my diet and lifestyle in terms, because we as we know, like diet and stress are huge factors in any disease, and I imagine with HIV/AIDS it's got to be the same.
Absolutely. We do know that folks who have a very active lifestyle, who are eating well, and so on and so forth, who are living with HIV have much better health outcomes, right? As well with those things. Now, of course, because I work for HIV service organization, I'm going to encourage anyone who's living with HIV to get into medical care, because it is a serious issue. But I also agree that what you said about a lot of these holistic things, they certainly help with health outcomes, and we know that the healthier someone's physical body is, because of how their active lifestyle is or what they're eating and so on and so forth, we know that they're going to have just better health outcomes, a better immune system, so on and so forth as well.
And barring sharing needles for IV drug use, HIV/AIDS is not as easy to spread as people think it is. Am I wrong about that?
So that is Yes, yes. I'm gonna say yes because here's the deal, right? People think it's hard. It's kind of hard to say because if you have unprotected sex with someone who is HIV positive, one time you could acquire the HIV virus. However, it's also totally possible that you could have unprotected sex with someone who's HIV possible several times and never contract the virus.
Right.
And that's because through sharing, sharing any blood is the easiest way to transmit it because that's where there's the most of the virus is in the blood. But in the other ways that it can be transmitted, such as from mother to child during pregnancy or through breast milk, or through contact with any semen, anal fluids, vaginal fluids, there is a risk for HIV there, but it's actually not as... It's not like you have sex with someone who has HIV one time and you're guaranteed to now be HIV positive. Yeah. There's a good chance that you will become that, but it isn't necessarily going to happen. With that in mind, of course, I do, encourage everyone, use condoms. They got latex, they got non-latex, they got flavors, they got ribbed for your pleasure, ribbed for her pleasure, ribbed for his pleasure, ribbed for the pleasure of the person down the street. I don't know. They have all fun different stuff.
They have some that even make it bigger, don't they?
They sure do. Look. They got everything. So I definitely encourage people to, use things like that, get tested, know your status, et cetera, et cetera. But crap, what was I going to go? And yeah, and I guess while we're on it, there's only 5 fluids that can transmit HIV that we know of. And those are blood, which transmits it the easiest because the most amount of HIV is found in the blood.
Right.
Then it's semen, vaginal fluids, anal fluids as well, and breast milk.
Wow. Is there an acronym for that?
No, there should be.
We got to come
up
with
one of the other
one.
things, though, that we know, because we're talking about, living with HIV is very different today, and it is. Today, if you were diagnosed with HIV, with having the virus in your body, even if it's kind of compromised your immune system, there are different tools and medications and things that we can use to combat the HIV, to make your CD4 cells, which are the good cells that HIV attacks, go back up, and that you can live a healthy life and have the same expected lifespan as people who are not living with HIV.
Okay.
If you get into proper medical care. We also know that individuals who are living with HIV, who are mothers, can, if they're in proper medical care, can give birth to children who will not develop HIV.
That's right.
So we know that as well.
Yeah.
And I tell people all these things because I think it's important to, we talk about stigma, and I mentioned before, sometimes we think people living with HIV are scary, and that's not the case. They're people who have a chronic illness, and that's what it's become now. It's not a death sentence. It is something that is manageable for the long term, and that's good. And I'm excited, to move forward and, have more education and more things come out regarding HIV because it's a real issue. But I think ultimately it starts with we have to have conversations with one another.
Yes.
Let people know we care and just, spread awareness.
Okay, well, listen, Austin, we're up to the last couple of minutes, so that's going to just about do it for us. I'm going to tell you, first and foremost, thank you so much for being with us. This has been an absolute pleasure. It's been definitely very enjoyable, very different than what we normally do here on Hangin' with Who. I'm thank you for the audience for sticking with us through such a controversial topic, an uncomfortable topic for some of us. But yeah, you've done an amazing job. You've given us a wealth of information, more than I could have ever expected. If you'd like to share any of your social media with us, any links or anything, please feel free to drop them in the chat. And we definitely would love to have you back at some point.
Awesome. I love it. Yeah. Maybe, we can talk about the conspiracy where Obama put chemicals in the water to turn the frogs gay.
Atrazine. Yeah, I know all about that. All right, Austin. Thank you so much. I'm going to move you back into the audience, and I'm going to bid everybody farewell for the evening.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for everyone who was in the chat, giving us some good information, some great jokes, and responding. I really appreciate you all for being here, and I hope you have a wonderful weekend. All right, y'all?
All right. Ta-ta. How was that for a gay goodbye, everybody? All right. Well, thanks for hanging with us here on Hanging with Who each and every Friday, currently at 5 p.m. Eastern Time on mspwaves.com. I certainly appreciate it. Everybody check out the pre-show post, and there'll be an after-show post with the recording on DTube within about an hour or so. Coming up next, I believe, is Globo Cop. I'm not 100% sure. I haven't seen him hanging out, but that's supposedly what's after. What's up, Soundwaves? I see you. All right, y'all. Stay next week. I've got Officer Dominic Izzo. Check him out on social media. Very interesting character. He trains police officers in combat and self-defense, and he is very outspoken against police brutality and excessive force. That's going to be a really, really interesting show for me. It's definitely going to be a first of its kind. Very, very much looking forward to it. In the coming weeks, I've got B. Johnson of Zero Waste Home. I've got Randall Stroud of Nalini Global coming on the air with us, and I'll be back here Monday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time with the flu shot, all things Steam It related. So send me some posts for live curation. I definitely need some posts, y'all. Help me out with that, please. So have a wonderful rest of your day.